I started the show thinking to myself, if I can help just one person stick around until tomorrow, then I feel like I did a good thing. Like I would rather live in a world where my podcast didn't need to exist. There's just so many different ways of telling stories, and I think this is just such a great way of doing it because you're able to reach pretty much anyone in the world with a podcast. I would have never gotten any of those messages if I just quit.
In today's episode of my podcast story, we have Scott DeLuzio, an Army veteran advocate, podcast host, and author. Scott is the voice behind the Drive On podcast, a show dedicated to sharing the inspiring stories of veterans and civilians alike, focusing on personal triumphs and the emotional challenges faced by those in the military community. After serving 6 years in the Army National Guard and experiencing the profound loss of his brother, Stephen, during their deployment to Afghanistan, Scott turned his pain into purpose. He created his podcast to foster connection and provide hope to fellow veterans navigating their own struggles. He's here to share his inspiring journey of how he built his show from the ground up and the impact it's having on the lives of many. I'd love for you to tell me your name, the name of your podcast, and what your podcast is about.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Scott DeLuzio. My podcast name is the Drive On Podcast, and it's focused on helping military veterans with a number of issues that they deal with after leaving the military service, especially those who served in combat, who have experienced some of those negative things. A lot of times people come back and they feel like they're all alone. They don't know where to turn, how to get the help that they need. So that's really what my podcast is focused on, is really letting people know that, you know, there are other people who have maybe been in their shoes and that they have perhaps some similar issues, and you know, there's people out there who can help.
Yeah. Well, what was the real reason? Let me take it one step at a time. Are you a veteran?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I served in the Army for about 6 years.
Okay. And you served in combat?
Yes. Yeah, I was in Afghanistan in 2010.
Okay. The next question is, what's the real reason you started the podcast?
Yeah, so not only did I have trouble when I came back from Afghanistan, I had experienced some things that were pretty difficult. My younger brother was also in Afghanistan, and he was killed in action. And so, yes, thank you. So coming home with that, it was, they call it survivor's guilt, where, you know, I felt guilty that I came home, but he didn't. And, you know, I had a lot of trouble adjusting, as I was coming back home. But it wasn't just me who was having trouble. A lot of the people, not only people that I served with, but just across the military in general, I was starting to notice a lot of people having some issues. There were several people that I served with in Afghanistan who survived combat, survived the war, but came home and, you know, unfortunately they lost their lives. They took their lives to suicide. And, you know, that was something to me that really affected me. And I said that I wanted to do something to help people like that, people like myself who was struggling, people like them who were struggling, and make sure that nobody felt that they were alone, that they had no place to turn. So I wanted to do something, and I wanted to reach many people. And so I decided, hey, let's start a podcast, because it's pretty much, it's free to anybody to access, as long as they have access to the internet and a device to do that, which most people these days do have, you know, especially the audience I was trying to reach. And, you know, so I figured that would be a good platform. And so that's kind of the background on where the show started.
Of all the things you could have used, you know, to reach your mission, why podcasting? I mean, you could have started maybe an NGO. There are various things you could have done to help these sets of persons. Why did you choose podcasting?
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, it was just a way to reach out and reach people wherever they were. They could listen to a podcast on their phone, on their computer, you know, when they're driving to work, maybe you know, when they're doing yard work at home. They could listen to a podcast anytime they want, and it's always there for them. And And I realize that there are people out there who have interesting stories that could be helpful to some of these people. And so with those stories, we not only get to help the listeners who might be having some troubles, but also helps some of the guests be able to share their story. And sometimes that helps them kind of process through some of the issues that they might have gone through and know that they're doing something good with that. They're turning that bad situation into something good. And so that's why I decided to go that route. Um, I've done some work in the nonprofit space, and it was just that was a lot of administrative work that I wasn't really ready for, and I didn't really want to get into. And so I figured a podcast would be a great way to reach as many people as possible.
Oh, how long have you been doing the podcast for now?
So about 6 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, I started in 2019, around this time of year. So we're almost at 6 years.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah,
You're getting closer to 10 years.
yeah, every day getting a little closer.
Yeah. Your podcast is audio, video.
Yeah, so audio and video. So it's available on YouTube. It's available on all the regular uh, audio only platforms like Apple and Spotify. And on Spotify, I've been uploading the videos lately as well. So video is definitely available if people enjoy watching the video.
How's the YouTube doing?
The YouTube was kind of a afterthought for me. When I started, I really just started as audio only. That's the way I was intending it at first. And then I decided I wanted to be able to reach people no matter where they preferred to listen to the content, whether it was audio only or if they enjoyed video. I wanted to be able to do that as well. So I started offering it up on YouTube. But kind of just as an afterthought, really just like I would post the video and not really think too much of it. And so the listeners weren't all that high, or the viewers, sorry, were not that high on YouTube. However, a couple of years ago, I was approached by a friend of mine who owns a television like streaming service for local content, and he asked if we could put my show on his station on his streaming channel, and so we did. So we did that for about 6 months, where the show was also on television. So video was a big component of that, obviously. We ended up going separate ways after that. But so the YouTube channel kind of took a backseat during that time period, and just lately I've been really trying to pick it back up again and really focus on trying to pick that up and grow.
What's the numbers like?
They're still pretty low. It's low to the point where it's very obvious that I've neglected it for quite some time. So I actually just recently got in touch with a friend of mine who is a coach for podcasting and YouTube and all of those things, and he did an audit of my show and gave me some recommendations. So I'm starting to implement some of those changes. So hopefully, later this year we'll start to see some of those numbers come up.
You mommy.
I'm sorry, what's that?
I said you said that the numbers are pretty low. So I said you mommy. Yeah.
Oh yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's one of those things where I didn't know what I didn't know about YouTube and podcasting too, for that matter. When I started the show, I knew I didn't really know a whole lot about podcasting. I had been a guest on a podcast, so I knew a little bit about how it worked just from my interaction with the other hosts, but I didn't know anything about the hosting or the audio quality or all these different technical things that sometimes go into putting a podcast together. And so I started recording and kind of just figured things out as I went along. And, if you go back and listen to the first few episodes, they're really not that good quality wise. But then as I went on, I started to learn, how to do things a little bit better and started becoming a little more proficient in editing the episodes, and then I added video, and so then that was a new thing that I had to learn and how to do all that, and um, it takes time, but for me, it's a passion project. So, I'll keep doing it, and I'll keep working on it and getting better over time, and see where it takes me.
Yeah. Currently, podcasting is not your full-time job, right? Okay. Okay. Um, the name you use for your podcast, was that your first choice, or was there something before that?
It's the first one that I used. I haven't really changed it. I added like a subtitle to it just a few months ago, but it's the first one that I had, the first choice. And the title "Drive On" is a military saying, thing that we say a lot of times when we're doing something difficult or the mission seems really hard or um, almost impossible to complete, and we'll say, "Hey, look, we have to drive on and we have to keep going." And
Yeah.
um, you know, you can't quit. Basically, that's the mindset that phrase has to other military veterans who hear it. They hear "drive on" and they say, "Okay, you know what? That means I can't quit." And so when we're talking about people who are struggling and unfortunately a lot of times dealing with thoughts of harming themselves, we want to let them know, hey, don't quit. Just keep driving on. Things will get better. You'll be able to, make it through this. So that's the first thing I want people to hear is that message. Just drive on. So that's why I named the show that.
Yeah. Yeah. Quickly before we go deeper into the other questions I'll be asking, I'd like us to just quickly run through the monetization aspects, right? Currently, does the show make money directly?
No, I didn't start the show with the goal in mind of making money. It was really something I wanted to do just to put it out there and help people. And along the way, I've had a few people, a few companies, I should say, reach out and offer some sponsorship money. So I've made some money over the years. But when you compare it to the amount of money I've spent on, microphones and hosting and other equipment and things like that, cameras and everything, in the long run, I've lost money on making the podcast. But again, like I said, it's a thing that I do. It's a passion project, and I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy trying to help people. So, like I said, money is not a huge focus for me, but if there are sponsors out there that want to pay for time on the show, then I'm certainly willing to work with them, but I don't actively go out and seek them.
Yeah. Okay. So I think a follow-up question for that would be, do you have a product or service kind of like that you offer that kinds of make money indirectly from your podcast?
Not many things. At this point, not really. I mean, I have on my podcast website, I have some merchandise, which is t-shirts and coffee mugs and things along those lines, hats with the podcast logo on it, but those are not big sellers. I've sold a few over the years, but nothing major. So, it's brought in a little bit of money, but not a lot. So, down the line, eventually I do want to do something with the podcast. I'm not sure if it's taking some of the episode content and making like a online course where people can go through and maybe get help on different aspects of the content that we discuss on the show, or maybe combining things from the podcast, making it into a book or something like that. I've had a few different ideas. I haven't figured out what I want to do with it yet. And so at this point, I haven't really made any products or services, but they're in the works. They're definitely something I'm thinking about doing.
Yeah. So for now, the podcast is a social. I want to say non-profit, but I prefer to call it a social business, a business that is meant for social good and social cause. If it makes money, great. If it doesn't, So it's okay.
Yes, exactly, and, I'm sure my wife would like it to make some money, so I don't don't have to, spend all the money on all the equipment and everything. She would like that, but, at this point, it's okay. It's something we can afford, and it's not, the biggest deal, but she would like that eventually.
Yeah. Okay. Out of curiosity, a side question. What does your setup look like?
Yeah, so I have a home office that I do my normal work in, but I was able to convert it into sort of a studio where I have a nice background behind me, and I have like military flags and things kind of hanging behind me. Um, on my desk, I have a camera right above my monitor, and that's what's facing me. A microphone over here that it's kind of on a boom arm that I can kind of swing around, and get it out of the way while I'm working, and swing it back around uh, while I'm recording. Microphone is a Shure MV7. Camera is an Elgato. Was I forget what they call it, face cam or something like that. And yeah, they get the job done.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
and
No,
I have like
the
lighting
way you
so
mentioned Shure
kind of
MV7,
light up the
and then
background and everything.
you mentioned Shure MV7, and then you go on to say they get. What I was saying was, you mentioned Shure MV7, and you just went on to say, well, it gets the job done. Like you're like in the top. Wow, in terms of podcasting equipment, that's like the elite sets of tools. You're doing well.
Yeah, so when I started, maybe I didn't quite say that the right way. When I started, I didn't really know anything about the equipment that went into it, and I still don't know all the details of everything. I've done some research and, looked on, websites and looked for things that say, this is the kind that you should use. This is the kind that, whatever is good. And, I went to my first microphone was a Blue Yeti, and I used that up until probably late last year. I think I started using. I finally switched to this. Um, and I guess that was the one that got you the job done. It was not very expensive, and it just it worked. Maybe not the best quality sounding, but it got the job done. It got my voice across, did what it needed to do, and then uh, had a couple issues with it, and decided it was maybe time to upgrade technology over time. Need a little upgrade, and so I decided just to spend a little money and get whatever people were recommending for
Yeah.
following. So and that's where I landed with this, and I've been happy with it ever since. I still don't know a whole lot about the technology that goes into it. I just look at other people's recommendations and go with that. I personally I have some hearing issues, and so for me, I don't always hear the difference between, one microphone to another. I just take someone's recommendation and say, "Hey, you say it's good, then okay, I'll use that, and I'll go with that." So, and so far it seems like it's been working. So I guess that's where I come from. Is it to me it doesn't matter a whole lot, but it does to other people, and so I guess it's working. So we'll keep it.
Yeah. Yeah. Your setup is quite nice. It gets the job done. Like
Mm,
not just get it. Like imagine we're having this conversation, and the sound, the audio sounds really good. So
excellent.
yeah. Oh, you started the podcast to help the people like you who were coming back from service. And
Mhm.
so for me, I want to ask now. It's been 6 years. How's that going? Like, how much progress have we made?
I think on an individual level, I've gotten messages from individual people, or family members of those individuals who said that the podcast has helped them, and it led them to a resource that they didn't know about, or it uh, you know helped them get through a tough time that they were going through. And so on an individual level, uh, one individual here, one individual there. Uh, I've gotten those types of messages where it's helped those people. And I don't know if those people, I don't know their whole backstory. They didn't give me everything. They just sent me a message and said, "Hey, this helped." And that to me means the world, because I started the show thinking to myself, if I can help just one person stick around until tomorrow, then I feel like I did a good thing. And when you start getting these messages in, and it wasn't just the one, it was many that have come in to me over the years, people giving me those kind of success stories, the way I look at it, then I feel good. Overall, though, when you look at the statistics from veterans, the numbers have not really been going down as far as the people who are unfortunately losing their lives, the way I was describing earlier. And um, that's kind of a thing that hurts. Like it feels like that number should be going down. Now I look at it this way, though. That number is maybe not as high as it could be because of work like what my podcast is doing. And there's others similar shows to mine, people who are doing something very similar. And um, I try to help them and promote them, and they try to help promote me, because the way we look at it is we're all trying to accomplish the same mission. And whether it's a story that you hear on my podcast or a story that you hear on somebody else's podcast, if that's what helps you, then I want you to find it. So we help each other out, and we try to promote each other. But um, I feel like as so long as we're helping, that one individual, if I can talk to that one person today and help that one person today, then that's great. And then we'll move on to the next person tomorrow. But we try to look at it from that individual level and see how many people we can actually touch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as much as the numbers might not be rising or reducing as the case might be, it means a lot to the individual that are listening to your podcast, and that's what matters.
Right. Yeah, and I've thought of it this way too. I actually don't want, this is kind of a strange way to think of it, but I actually don't want people to have to listen to my podcast, meaning that I don't want them to have to be in that position where they are having the problems that they're having. And like, I would rather live in a world where my podcast didn't need to exist.
Yes.
I could be doing so many other things.
That's not the case.
I know, right? I wish it was the case, but
Yeah.
It isn't. And so long as those numbers keep either staying where they are or rising, or as long as those numbers are not zero, then I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm going to keep putting episodes out there and helping people, for as long as I can.
Yeah. Like, since I've been doing the interview for this podcast, I've had different types of podcasts come on the show, and it just shows the diverse range of reasons and things you could do with a podcast, and that for me it's really inspiring.
Yeah, there are so many different podcasts out there. I've done some research just looking into the different types of podcasts that the different topics that people talk about on their podcast, and trying to see how they promote themselves, what type of content they're putting out. Are they shorter episodes? Are they longer episodes? There's just such a variety with all the different things that you can look at between whether they're solo episodes or whether they have guests, or how many guests, or do they have 5 guests on at the same time? Do they have 2? Is it, how many do they do? There's just so many different ways of telling stories, and I think this is just such a great way of doing it, because you're able to reach pretty much anyone in the world with a podcast, and as long as the story is good and the information that you're providing is useful, then I think you'll have a good time.
Yeah. When you say your podcast, how long did it take before you got your first fan message?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember. It's probably within maybe a year or so, somewhere around there. Yeah. Now, when I first saw the show, I did not do what I would probably recommend to myself if I was starting another podcast today. But when I started the show, the first oh gosh, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 6 or 7 episodes or so, that I released. I didn't really tell anyone about the podcast. I was just putting the episodes out there and seeing what would happen. Um,
Oh,
Mostly because I didn't know if I was gonna continue doing the podcast, and I didn't wanna make a huge announcement to
oh,
all my
so
friends
you're
and
just like,
family and everything, "Hey, I'm doing a podcast, come check it out," and then not have anything there, so I decided not to do anything, but then I realized I kind of enjoyed it, and, I wanted to keep doing it, so that's when I started telling people about it. By then, I lost all the traction that I might have gotten from, like, on Apple, they have, like, the new releases, the new podcasts, that I wasn't able to get any traction from that because, by the time I let people know about it, it was already probably almost 2 months, after I released the first episode, and so, um, you know, that's when people started listening, as far as friends and family, and then they started sharing it, and then that kinda grew a little bit from there, but, it didn't start off very, with a lot of listeners. The first few episodes, very,
yeah.
very few listeners.
I mean, if you're not an influencer or a celebrity, most of the first 10 to 100 listeners, we tend to get them directly by talking to people one on one. And then from there, the network effect just happens. People talk
Right.
about it, and then we get more listeners.
Yeah,
So
the
far,
first few are really hard.
yeah. Uh, so far, you've been podcasting now for 6 years, and I believe that the things that we work on us. So, what has podcasting taught you about yourself that, kind of surprised you?
Well, I have done most of my episodes with a guest. So I've done a few solo episodes where it was just me talking, and but the majority of the episodes, I'd probably say over 80%, maybe 90% of the episodes I do with a guest. And what I've come to find out is that um, I my personality is not very uh, much like I'm not the life of the party. I'm not like a big uh, social person where I like to go out and talk to lots of people and do lots of things. I'm very introverted that way personally. But when I'm doing the podcast and I'm talking one on one with somebody, I found that I've started to enjoy those types of conversations and learning about the person's background and their story, and kind of like what you're doing here today with me, kind of just
Yeah.
reverse the roles. I like trying to find out a little bit more about people and dig into their background and learn about them. And that was something before I did the podcast I never did. I would never. I just never cared to ask those questions to people. And then I found that people who I have on my show, very often, it's very, very much like what we're doing today, where prior to the recording, we've never met. I never met some of these people beforehand. And by the end of the conversation, I find that we have started to develop uh, I don't want to say we're best friends, but we've developed a bit of a relationship by the end of the conversation where I would not feel strange or awkward sending the person an email or a text message or phone call to ask them a question or something, because we've kind of developed a relationship by the end of that conversation. So it's kind of a nice change of pace for me because I have been able to do some of the stuff that I just never would have done before.
Oh, oh, okay, okay. I was expecting a long list.
A long list. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the big thing for me. I think,
Mhm.
um, each individual episode, I could probably go into something that the guest has said to me that has changed my point of view, changed the way I thought about things, or challenged some assumptions that I've had that were about myself, or different beliefs that I might have had, not religious beliefs, but just personality wise, that type of thing. And so, it's been a pretty interesting journey for me because it allowed me to do things that I would never have done before, to speak to people that I never would have spoken to before. I've talked to people uh, all all over the world on the podcast who, some of them are uh, veterans from other countries, and they wanted to come on and share their story. I've had people from Australia and Canada and Ireland and other countries, around the world, and it's to me it's interesting to hear those stories too. And while my podcast primarily focuses on American U.S. veterans, um, it's it's interesting because a lot of those people who were in those different countries, they they fought in the same wars that we fought in, and sometimes they were right side by side with Americans, and it's interesting to hear their experiences as well when they came home, and it exposed my way of thinking to kind of a bigger global view than just what's happening in my own backyard. And so, it's just changed me in those types of ways. Kind of changed my way of thinking and changed my approach to how I just interact with people. Allows me to have a little deeper conversations with people.
Yeah, yeah. I feel, it's an interesting thing because the problem you seeked out to solve is the kind of something that you connected and resonated with, and so um, um, while you were solving it for others, in turn you were also solving yours too, and getting better too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of had a nice side benefit of that where it's not exactly like therapy, but it's almost like a therapy for me too, where I get to hear all these great stories and all these great uh, things that people do to help other people, and um, I'm hearing them very first time. I'm the very first listener to every single episode because I'm sitting there listening to all these conversations as they're happening, and it's kind of nice to be able to get that benefit as well.
Yeah. Has podcasting ever gotten you in trouble?
I've been pretty lucky with that. No, not really. I can't think of anything that really got me in trouble with that. Um, we never really had any controversial episodes or topics that we covered, and maybe that's a problem. Maybe I should start pushing some boundaries a little and see what else we can put out there.
Yeah, your podcast is not the type of podcast that is designed to get into trouble easily, except you want to get into trouble.
Yeah, I know that's a good way. Getting into trouble is a good way to get more publicity, more people talking about the podcast,
increase the collection of stories.
Exactly. Yeah. And, unfortunately I haven't gone there, but maybe I should, try to think of some ways that I can get into a little bit of trouble. You might have inspired me
for the record, I wasn't the one that inspired you to get into trouble. I'm just saying it out there so that whatever happens, they will say, it was the one that told me. I did not tell him anything. Okay.
No, but you planted the seed in my brain, and now it's going to grow into something, and it's going to be bigger.
I don't know about that. So before they'll carry me as accomplice. Say you're the one who told him to do so and so. Say, but I never said anything about that. We just talked about this. Oh,
yeah, right.
Okay.
I will. I'll keep your name out of it. Don't worry.
Okay. But if you do something nice, Dosha, that's the funny thing about life. When you amount to something successful, you're like, wow, I always knew it was going to be great. I advised him, I told him, I did this.
Yeah.
But when you do something and then it becomes catastrophic, they're like, I always knew that it would amount to nothing. He did not listen.
Yeah.
People always have a way to find a way to to attach themselves to success and then run away from people who society quote unquote classifies as failure.
Well, and the nice thing that you have right now is on this episode recording, you have both sides of the story, so you can use either one if it helps. If I do become a big success, you can say, "Oh yeah, well I told him to do that," or "No, I don't tell him to do that."
I was there. I was his inspiration. I was his muse.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. When you this is kind of like a play on of the previous question I asked you.
Yeah.
When you started podcasting, I think it was just like the first. It was your first attempt at it, right?
Yes.
Okay. Was there like any kind of like belief myth that you had that when you started podcasting, it kind of like changed your perspective, and you're like, oh, I never knew. Thank God I got to do this thing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, when I started, I really didn't know anything about how to podcast. I knew you had to record something and then you had to put it somewhere, but I didn't know where that somewhere was. I didn't know, what the format of the files had to be, and I didn't know any of the technical details. I had a technical background. I used to do like website design and that type of thing, so in software development. So I had an idea of like what might go into it, but I didn't really know. I knew the files had to be hosted somewhere. I had to do all these kind of things, but I just didn't know where or how and all that. So there was a lot of discovery for me to determine what I needed to do and where I needed to put things and how I needed to do it. And over time, my workflow has evolved and changed where, when I started, I didn't really have a clear workflow, and I would missteps in the process of producing things, and I would have episodes that would come out that just did not sound good at all, because I missed certain steps in the editing, or I did something to the file that just maybe corrupted it or whatever, and it just didn't sound good at all. And then I would have to go back and re-release it because I had the good recording. I don't know how I screwed it up. So I would do things like that. Um, and it became a learning experience. And I realized partway through that I needed to come up with a process for everything that I do. So if I do the same thing every single time, I can't mess it up. And so I basically came up with a checklist for every episode. I go through and I do the same, however many steps it is. I do the same steps every single episode, and until I have the final product, and then I release it. And so I know every time I release it, it's going to be as good as it can be. And I'll refine my process and make that better over time too. But for now, it's as good as it can be, and until I figure out something else that'll make it even better.
Yeah, so far you talked about some of the challenges you had when you started, but now you've kind of learned, you've kind of grown. Yeah, you're kind of like an OG podcasting, if I can say that.
Sure.
For me, I want to say is of all your technical disasters, which one still stands out in your memory that every time you think back, you're like, oh,
Yeah. Well, I said early on, uh, I didn't have a lot of listeners because just didn't tell anybody about my podcast. And so, it turned out that was in a way a little bit of a good thing, because one of the disasters was one of the first episodes, probably I don't know, first, second, or third episode, somewhere around there. And I released it. It was out there live to the world. Anyone could have listened to it. And for some reason, my voice sounded like a robot. And I don't know what I did to the audio file. I messed up something in editing it, but it made my voice sound very robotic. My wife listened to it, and she told me, "Hey, this sounds strange. This is not your voice. I'm not sure how this got that way." And I went back and I listened to it, and I I was so embarrassed, and I was like, "Ah, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I don't think I know what I'm doing enough to put out something that's worth anybody's time to even listen to." But then I went back and I it was determined that this is a mission for me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this podcast because I want to help these people. And so I went out and I did the edits that I needed to do to get it back to sounding the right way. And that was a point where I almost just gave up within the first few episodes, because I was just embarrassed by how bad it was. But I determined, like, I can't I can't just quit because then I really didn't do anything. I didn't accomplish anything, and what am I going to do with all this stuff that I bought, the microphone and the cameras and all the things that I bought in order to do this? And so I was like, you know what, and more than that, I wanted to make sure that the people that I set out to help were getting the help that they need. And I said, if I'm gonna let a little bit of my ego or my pride get in the way of getting this done, then I'm not the right person for this anyways. And so I said, I need to just put that aside and say, you know what, it's not a big deal. Nobody's gonna care, and I'm gonna just keep doing it. And I reminded myself of the title of the show, Drive On, and I said, look, I messed up. I did something bad, and it came out not sounding so great. But that's okay. I'm gonna drive on. I'm gonna keep doing it, and we'll we'll take it from there, and we'll just use it as a learning lesson, and um, hopefully, I don't make those mistakes again, and I don't think I've done anything like that again. Um, one thing I do pride myself on is that since the time that I started the show, I have not. I've been very consistent, and I have not missed a single week of releasing an episode since I started. Um, and that almost happened because I almost quit on it very early on, and who knows if I would have picked it back up, after all that. But um, my guess is I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have just stopped and been done. But then I would never been helping anybody. So, and that's really what I set out to do.
Yeah, can you take us back to the first time you felt like quitting?
Yeah, it was that time when that episode came out, and it just didn't sound good. It sounded all robotic like that, and that was a time when I said to myself, basically, I just beat myself up in my head, like just mentally beat myself up and said, you're not good enough for this. You don't know what you're doing. Um, you know, don't waste your time on this because nobody's going to listen to it anyways. And those are the kind of things that I was telling myself. And I don't know, like looking back on it now, I'm so glad that I didn't, because just so many people have listened to it, and I don't get messages from every single person, but
Yeah.
when I do get messages from people, it feels really good. And I would have never gotten any of those messages if I just quit. There've been other times too um, where I've felt like I maybe wanted to quit because it was maybe interfering with other things that I had going on. I was just really busy. But I said, I can't give up on this. It's my mission. I can't stop now, and I'm going to keep going. Even if it's hard and I have a lot of things going on, and maybe I'll just plan a little bit better where I record a lot of episodes beforehand and just release them as time goes on. So that way I free up some time, when I'm going to be a little bit more busy with family or work or other things that I have going on. And so, there's been several times when I've thought about quitting, but that I quickly tell myself, no way, I can't quit.
Yeah. I just remember that I didn't ask you this question at the beginning because there are the top podcasters, and then how do I say it now? There are a lot of podcasts in the world, but the number of podcasters that are actually active, that's podcasters that are releasing episodes, consistently, maybe every week or every 2 weeks, depending on the type of podcast and the frequency of that. The number of podcasts that are active, they're like very small compared to the large pool of podcasts in the world. A lot of the numbers it's in mainstream media is actually different from what is in real life. Yeah, because for most podcasters, if they're getting maybe 2,000 downloads in the first 7 days, they are among the top 1% of podcasters, and they are doing crazily well. And most people don't even know that that's true, because now the people they see on the internet, they're like, oh, I get 1 million downloads every episode. They're like, oh, since I'm getting 5,000 downloads, I don't even know what that is. So I don't know if you are comfortable with sharing, and if you don't mind, I'd love to know what the average downloads for your podcast is.
So I think, to what you were saying, your point there is that, what is good, what is not good. And I think it depends on the type of podcast that you have. If you have a really small market that your audience is in, you probably can't expect to have 1 million downloads every episode because, maybe only 500 people out there actually would be in that audience who might actually listen. And so if you have 500 listens for any given episode, then that's really good because you have basically everybody in your target audience. If you have 200, that's probably still good because it's, that's still a good percentage of your entire audience. And so I think it really depends, like what, for every different type of podcast, what does good look like? I don't know. I don't know what good is. And I hadn't really paid too much attention, honestly, to my download numbers until recently, when I noticed a strong decrease in my listens at the beginning of this year, and it was very confusing to me. I lost about half of my normal listeners, um, and I started digging into the numbers, and I realized that for some reason, a lot of my listeners were subscribed to me, to my show on Samsung Podcasts. And Samsung Podcasts went away in December of this past year. And so a lot of the listeners went away with it because they no longer had that app on their phone or whatever device that they were using. And so that hurt. And so I realized that no matter what type of podcast you have, you can't rely on somebody else's platform. Well, in this case, like Samsung Podcasts, I can't rely on that to be there next year or a year from now, and that includes all the podcast platforms, even the big ones that seem pretty solid. You can't rely on them because you don't have any control over them. Yeah, sure. Most likely Apple Podcasts is going to be here next year and Spotify is going to be here next year, but there's no guarantees with any of that. Maybe something happens and the company goes bankrupt and they decide to, stop doing, supporting whatever app. And so you can't rely on somebody else. So, I've been looking at ways that I can do things that I can rely on, and building an email list, or even your social media accounts. Those social media platforms, either the company can close or get consolidated with another company, or maybe they gosh, I don't know, maybe they ban your account for something that you post, and even that audience doesn't exist anymore. I don't know. Like it's one of those things where, like, the numbers to me never were all that important. Again, going back to it, I always was looking at, like, can I just help this one individual with this episode, and then with the next episode, I'll help the next individuals. For me, good was as long as I had one person listening to the episode, like, that was good. And I never really paid too much attention to it outside of that. And every episode has had people listen to it. Obviously, I've had hundreds and thousands of people listening to episodes, but I don't, off the top of my head, I don't even know the numbers, exactly what they are. So to be able to share anything with any meaning, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But I think for as far as the listeners go, like anyone who has a podcast, not to get discouraged. If your episode, let's say, has 100 listeners, and you feel like, oh, well, it should be 1,000 or 10,000 or however many you feel like it should be. Think about it this way. If you were giving a speech in front of an audience of 100 people, you'd be like, oh, okay, that's a pretty good size audience that you're giving a speech to, at a conference or, giving a presentation, 100 people, 200 people, however many it is, that's a pretty big size room that you'd be giving a speech to. And if every episode had 100 downloads, or 200 or whatever the number is, think about it that way. Like you're basically, you're given the opportunity to stand up in front of an audience of that many people for every single episode and present to them whatever it is, whatever your topic is that you're talking about. You get to present that as if you're the expert, the leading expert in whatever that information is. So, look at it that way.
Yeah. Wow. I'm kind of curious. Okay. I am curious, not kind of. I'm curious to know. And I know those that are listening, they are curious to know too. Would you be so kind as to satisfy this our curiosity?
I'd satisfy the curiosity about
Just
what?
give us a number. Just give,
Mm,
even if it's 8 months old number, give us a number.
I
It doesn't
honestly
have
don't
to
have.
be current.
Yeah, I don't have numbers off the top of my head, and I'm not at this point. I'm not ready to provide those numbers. So, like I
Oh,
said,
okay. It's all right. I mean, we tried our best, but it's all right. Yeah, the reason why I'm asking the question is, as much as I will consider you as someone who has a very niched podcast,
yeah,
and as an active podcaster, I would assume that you've been podcasting for 6 years now and you've been doing it consistently.
yeah,
Yeah, so I wanted to like give people kind of like just to show them what the real world looks like.
yeah.
Podcast is
I
one of
mean,
those things that you can't see the numbers. There's no way you can see it except the host tells you.
right, and the numbers are only as good as what I get from my podcast platform, which um, honestly, I don't really know that I believe the numbers that they give me anyways, and so I'm not sure how meaningful the numbers are to even provide to you. If I told you it's 200 listeners per episode, I don't know if that's even true.
Oh, he said a number. We'll take that one.
You could take the number, yeah. I don't know. But that's
Yeah.
the thing is I'm not sure if it's even true. The platform that I host with, the reason why I say that is because they recently changed something in their reporting with the numbers that they provided me, where they filter out episodes that didn't listen to a certain percentage of the episode. So the numbers they're skewed. Like the number, and those are the only numbers I really get. And so, like, to tell you, like, is it 200? Is it 500? I really don't know. And so, you're right. It is a small audience, and that's kind of what I was getting at before. Is like my audience is pretty a smaller niche audience. It's not general population. Applicable to the general population. I'm not expecting to get millions of downloads per episode. I had one episode that had like 15,000 downloads, and that just blew my mind because that was just way more than I ever thought I would ever get on this show. So, I'm giving you some statistics here, but
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah.
it's
You don't know, like, I don't know how to explain it. I know that number is not so significant, but the thing is this: a lot of persons, they start a podcast, they don't even know, because this is the okay, how do I put? They've been brainwashed by the media that, oh, you have to have 10 million, stuff like that, and I'm like, look, you don't necessarily need to have those high numbers to be an active podcast. There are a lot of people who, every episode they release, they get about 500 to 600 downloads, and they have an active podcast and an active audience, and they're doing well. You get, so usually that's why I like get to ask the host, and then they tell the different, depending on the kind of podcast. And as much as it's people that's listening to to the episodes, that's what's important.
Yeah, and as we're talking here, let me just give you what I can. I'm going to log into
Wow,
my statistics here. So on average,
that's
it's
that's
about
so generous of you.
it's about 200 listeners per episode, uh,
Wow,
and that's across all the different streaming
our
platforms.
platforms.
Now that doesn't include like YouTube and other play because it doesn't pull from there. But I don't know
Yes,
how
yes,
much that might add. But so that's a rough numbers. But again, it's a niche audience, and it's not a um, it's not a general interest kind of thing where
yeah.
everybody's going to be interested in what.
Yeah, I mean, 200 people in a room. That's a crowd. That's a mob.
Yeah.
That-
Right, exactly,
yeah,
and if you
yeah.
think about it, like if for anyone who's actually stood up on a stage in front of a crowd, I've been on stages talking to crowds of not, I don't want to say crowds, but I've been on stage talking to people with audiences as small as 10 or 15 people, and audiences as big as 400 people, and I mean when I'm on the stage, either way, if it's 10 or 15 people or 400 people, to me, it doesn't matter. I still get a little bit nervous getting up on the stage and talking to all those people. This is a whole lot easier being able to record it and then release it and then let those people listen to it later. I'm not nervous when I'm talking to a microphone in my computer. But standing up on top of on a stage like that is a lot more nervous, to do it with all those
Yeah.
people staring at you, you know? And so, you know, I like I like this better, but
Yeah.
I'll still do it. I'll still go on a stage and talk to people, and
Mm,
if people are willing to listen, I'm willing to get on the stage and talk. It's just a little more
yeah.
nervous for me.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean podcasting. I don't know. I did not get to meet you 6 years ago when you started your podcast, but I believe that podcasting has kind of like touched you in terms of communication, speaking,
Yeah.
and etc. Because you get to interview guests, talk to guests, and in that way you basically practice in every week, every other week, and in over 6 years, the improvement gets to show.
Yeah, and it's the nice thing too is that, I you're right, I do get to practice, the way that I communicate with people, and, it's even changed the way I think about things in my own, my family relationship, and, how I interact with my children and my wife and things, and so it's helped me in my personal life, it's helped other people, and so I think just for general benefit, it's helped lots of people, and that's what we're looking for.
Yeah. On a final note, what's one advice you love to give to the podcaster listening that's thinking of getting started or just got started?
Yeah, if you're thinking of getting started, the advice that I have is just get started. Don't worry about all the equipment and all the advice from all the experts and everything. Like, just get started. That's the best thing is get started and let people know what you're doing. Tell your friends and your family and everybody who you think might listen to the podcast. Tell them about it and tell them to share it with people that they know that might wanna listen to whatever the topic is, and get it out there. The worst thing that you could do is not tell anybody about it because, Apple and Spotify and all the other platforms, they're not gonna promote it for you, if you're not putting in any effort either. If
Yeah.
you just got started and you're into it and you're starting to realize, "Hey, this is a lot of work." Well, it is a lot of work, but keep doing it. And pay attention to, this is one of the things I did, is pay attention to how much time you're spending on the different tasks that you need to do in order to release an episode. And so even if that means like sit down and write down a list of all the tasks that you need to do, and then go through and edit a few episodes and do all the things that you need to do to release the episode, and write down next to each task how much time it took you to do each thing, and look to see what's taking you the most time, and then look at ways of improving that to make it take less time. Or even sometimes you might be doing something that you really don't need to be doing, and you might even be able to just eliminate that from your whole process. The reason why I say this, because one of the things that I found that, through talking to other podcasters is that, when they get to that point where they feel like they're going to quit, or they do actually quit, it's because they're like, they just say it just took too much time. And I couldn't keep doing it because it took too much time. Well, if you ask them, like, well, what part of it took too much time? They don't really know. And they just know in total it took too much time. Okay, well, certain individual tasks might only take a few seconds here and there, maybe a couple minutes, to do certain things. And, like uploading your episode, that doesn't take a lot of time. That's real quick. But other things, and some things in the editing process, maybe you're editing too much. Maybe you don't need to go that crazy with all the edits that you do. Or maybe you can find another software that can do some of the edits for you, that makes the whole process a whole lot easier. I feel like if you can, take a look at the process that you're using and reduce some of the time, and be conscious of like what is consistently causing me to take so much time. Maybe you can reduce some of that, and maybe that'll allow you to keep doing it and, get better at it and spend even less time. I mean, more time in total, but less time per episode, as you go on. So just pay attention to those processes, and, even write things down if you have to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott, for coming on the podcast, and thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for your honesty, and thank you so much for giving us special access to your download numbers for now. I really, really, really do appreciate that. Where can listeners learn more about you, your podcast, and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to driveonpodcast.com to find the podcast, or search for Drive On anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and you should be able to find it there. And that's where you can find it. Same thing, YouTube as well. All the social media is at Drive On Podcast. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those different platforms. Just search for Drive On Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of My Podcast Story. I am Wisdom Okonkwo, and I hope this conversation sparked new ideas and gave you a deeper look into the heart of podcasting. If you've loved this episode, consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Every bit helps keep the stories going. And hey, don't forget to follow, rate, and share this podcast with another podcaster or creator who would find it helpful. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.